Sometimes the deepest secrets in life are hidden in plain sight, written in black ink on official paper that most people would never think twice about. In the case of Clint Eastwood, one of Hollywood's most legendary actors and directors, the truth about his private life was captured in just two short words. On the birth certificate of his son Scott, under the space where a father's name should have been written, there appeared only a cold and shocking statement. Father declined. With those words, Clint legally separated himself from his son from the very moment of birth. For decades, very few people knew about this detail. Fans saw Clint as a strong, silent hero on screen, a man who stood for justice and toughness. But behind that image, there was a story filled with hidden affairs, broken promises, and difficult choices that would shape the lives of his children forever. The truth about why Clint made such a painful decision has only come into focus after years of silence, as the pieces of his family history finally came together. It is a story of love and betrayal, of discipline and rejection, and ultimately, of a father who tested his son in ways most people could never imagine. To understand why Clint Eastwood would go so far as to erase his own name from his son's life, we need to look back at his career and personal life during the 1970s and 1980s. At that time, Clint was not only a famous actor but also a worldwide symbol of tough masculinity. His cowboy characters and hard-edged roles had made him a global star. Off-screen, he appeared to have stability as well. He lived for 14 years with actress Sandra Locke, and to the public they seemed like a perfect Hollywood couple. Locke even believed that Clint had written her a personal song about their relationship, showing his love and loyalty. But the truth was very different. While Locke thought she was part of a faithful and exclusive partnership, Clint was secretly involved with other women. One of those women was Jocelyn Reeves, a flight attendant who played a much bigger role in his life than most people ever realized. Their relationship was not just a quick affair. It was serious enough to bring two children into the world, Scott, born in 1986, and Catherine, born in 1988. At this time, Clint was still living with Locke, which meant his new family had to remain hidden at all costs. His decision to keep them secret and legally distance himself from them was part of a much larger pattern of control and secrecy that defined how Clint managed his personal life. While Clint Eastwood was living in California, as a rich and powerful movie star, his son Scott was growing up far away in Hawaii. Because his birth certificate listed no father, Scott did not carry the famous Eastwood name. Instead, he grew up as Scott Reeves, a boy with a simple life on the Big Island. His childhood looked nothing like the world of Hollywood. He spent his days surfing, fishing, and exploring the outdoors. His family lived on a ranch with cattle and wide green hills, and he learned early on to enjoy a life connected to nature. At school, Scott was known as a haole, a word used in Hawaii to describe white people who were in the minority there. This gave him experiences of being different, of feeling like an outsider, lessons that shaped his early character. What he did not have was the sense of belonging that came from carrying his father's name or being publicly recognized as Clint Eastwood's son. This was not an accident. Clint had deliberately kept him hidden, perhaps believing that a secret son raised in a quiet, ordinary setting would never come under the spotlight. But secrets like this rarely stay hidden forever, and as Scott grew older, his path eventually led him to confront the father who had once declined him. Scott eventually left Hawaii as a teenager and moved to California to live with Clint. For most children, meeting a father after years of absence might bring hugs, apologies, and attempts to make up for lost time. But Clint Eastwood was not most fathers. He believed in tough lessons and old-school discipline. Instead of giving Scott money or comfort, he gave him tests. When Scott asked for help buying a truck for work, Clint refused without hesitation. His point was clear. Nothing would be handed to him just because of his family name. The lessons extended beyond money. Clint expected discipline, responsibility, and respect, and sometimes these lessons came in physical form. One story from Scott's teenage years shows just how extreme Clint could be. After Scott left his younger sister at a party one night, Clint responded not with a lecture but with a punch to his son's face, telling him never to leave her again. Scott later described this as very old-school parenting, and while harsh, it left a lasting impression. Clint was not trying to be a friend. He was shaping his son into someone who could survive without special treatment. This strict approach would continue as Scott pursued his own career, and it became clear that Clint was determined to make his son earn everything on his own. Clint Eastwood's relationship with Scott was not the only example of how he managed his family life with secrecy and control. Long before Scott was born, Clint had already developed a pattern of keeping certain relationships hidden from the public eye. One of the earliest examples came in the 1950s, when he had a brief relationship in Seattle that resulted in a daughter, Lori Murray, who was placed for adoption without his knowledge. Clint did not meet her until she was in her 30s and had gone searching for her biological parents. Later, during his marriage to Maggie Johnson, Clint carried on a 14-year affair with stuntwoman Roxanne Tunis. From that relationship came another daughter, Kimber, born in 1964. For many years, Kimber's existence was kept secret, only becoming public in the late 1980s when the tabloids revealed it. By then, Clint had already developed a reputation as someone who fiercely protected his image, even if it meant keeping his own children out of sight. When the truth about Kimber came out, reports claimed that Clint reacted with anger and even temporarily cut ties with her. These examples show a pattern. For Clint, secrecy was not only about avoiding scandal, but also about maintaining control over who could claim a connection to his life, reputation, and wealth. This same thinking likely played a role in why Scott and Catherine were legally separated from him on paper, with father declined stamped in the most important document of their early lives. Of the most explosive episodes in Clint's personal life was his long relationship and eventual breakup with actress Sandra Locke. They lived together for 14 years, and to outsiders, they looked like a committed couple. Behind closed doors, however, their relationship was filled with tension. Locke later claimed that Clint pressured her into having abortions and even a medical procedure that made her unable to have children because he did not want to start a family with her. By the late 1980s, their relationship collapsed in a way that shocked Hollywood. While Locke was away working on a film, Clint had the locks on their shared home changed and moved her belongings into storage. She found herself suddenly locked out of the life they had built together. What followed was a long legal battle. Locke sued Clint for palimony, accusing him of emotional distress and manipulation. The case was settled, but the story did not end there. As part of the settlement, Clint promised to help her get a directing deal at Warner Bros. For Locke, this seemed like a step toward building her own career. But later, she discovered that the money for the deal had secretly come from Clint himself, making the whole thing appear fake. She felt it was a trap designed to ruin her credibility in Hollywood. When she sued him again for fraud, the case went all the way to trial before Clint quietly settled once more. This public and bitter fight showed how far Clint was willing to go to maintain control, even over a longtime partner. For Scott and Catherine, born during the final years of this relationship, their father's decision to erase his name from their lives may have been strongly influenced by the chaos and cost of his battle with Locke. When Scott Eastwood finally decided to pursue acting, he faced another round of hard lessons from his father. Unlike many children of famous actors, Scott was not given easy roles or financial support. Instead, Clint seemed determined to make sure his son started at the very bottom. Scott first tried to work under his mother's name, Reeves, so people would not connect him to Clint. He auditioned for nearly every film his father directed, but was repeatedly turned down. Even when he did win a part in his father's movie Gran Torino in 2008, the role was small and the pay was the minimum allowed by the actors' union. On top of that, Clint made the experience even tougher. During filming, his character hurled insults at Scott's character, many of which were improvised and not written in the script. For Scott, it felt as though his father was sending him a direct message on camera. In this world, you will not be treated as special, not even by me. Clint's philosophy was clear. If Scott wanted to be an actor, he would have to prove his worth without help or favors. This attitude continued even after Scott began landing bigger roles on his own. When he considered signing a multi-film contract for Suicide Squad sequels, he asked Clint for advice. His father gave him no encouragement, just practical advice. Take the deal only if the role is good and the studio really needs you. Otherwise, walk away. To many, Clint's cold approach might look like a lack of support. But to Clint, it was consistent with his lifelong belief that success must be earned, not handed out. Or many people, growing up with such a distant and demanding father, would have created bitterness. But in Scott's case, the opposite seems to have happened. The rejection, the absence of special treatment, and the tough discipline forced him to become resilient and independent. He has often spoken about how his father's lessons shaped his character. He learned to work hard, to avoid complaining, and to accept rejection as part of life. These values became especially important when he faced struggles outside of acting. In 2014, he experienced one of the most painful losses of his life when his girlfriend, Jewel Brangman, died in a tragic car accident. The grief hit him deeply and left scars that made it difficult for him to open up to others for years. But rather than break him, the pain became part of the resilience he had been taught from a young age. He also found grounding in martial arts, particularly Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which he called the ultimate humbling experience because it strips away ego and forces you to face reality. On the mat, it does not matter who you are or who your father is. You win or lose based on your own effort. Combined with his love for the outdoors, which he carried from his childhood in Hawaii, Scott built a lifestyle that kept him connected to simplicity and reality rather than the illusions of Hollywood. These choices reflected the very values Clint had drilled into him, even if the method had been harsh. Today, Clint Eastwood is 94 years old, and while he remains private about his personal life, the story of his relationship with Scott is no longer hidden. From the moment Clint wrote "Father declined" on his son's birth certificate, he set in motion a journey that could have destroyed their bond forever. Instead, the difficult path forged something unusual but lasting between them. They do not share the warm and openly affectionate relationship that some fathers and sons have, but they share something built on time, struggle, and mutual respect. Scott has publicly described his father as his hero, someone whose work and values continue to inspire him. He hopes one day to follow in Clint's footsteps as a director. For Clint, the gamble of denying his son his name and privileges was meant as the ultimate test. He wanted to see if Scott had the strength to create his own identity before stepping into the Eastwood legacy. Looking back, the test worked in a strange way. Scott became a man who does not rely on handouts, who faces life with humility, and who survives hardships with resilience. In the end, Clint never had to explain why he disowned his son. The answer is written not in interviews or statements, but in the life Scott has built for himself. The lesson was cruel, but it produced the kind of man Clint believed in. That, more than anything, may be Clint Eastwood's final and unspoken admission about the choice he made so many years ago.